Thank you everybody for joining DigitalOcean's webinar today. And thank you so much for spending some time with us. A couple things to call out. This webinar will be recorded. Video will be put on YouTube for everybody to see. If you're on the email list, which I think everybody is, we are going to email you the link to that. Let's see, if you have any questions, type them in the questions box. We'll get to them during stream, or if we don't get to them during stream, we'll get to them at the end of the stream. And if we don't get to them then, we're going to do everything in a Google Doc and share that out to you through a link. My name is Chris Sevaleja. I go by Chris on Code on Twitter. And here I am the Senior Developer Advocate at DigitalOcean. I'm the founder of Scotch.io web development website. Okay, so here we are. What we're going to do today is we're going to create a custom API. This is kind of the same thing that we did in the previous webinar. You can find the recording for that on YouTube. And we'll do our own REST API in about 5 minutes. And then once we have our REST API, we're going to grab all data from it and kind of build out something, I don't know yet, but we'll do it in React. So what we're going to do here is we have DigitalOcean.com. We do a lot of hosting for whatever you need. And here we have Strapi, which is an open source headless CMS. So I've been doing a lot about the Jamstack lately, where basically we separate the back end and the front end. So here I'm going to build an API, and then we're going to consume it with React, a front end JavaScript library, and it'll be totally separate, which kind of makes our development a little bit easier. Strapi is really cool because we can install it on DigitalOcean with one click. Here, if we go to the DigitalOcean marketplace, there's a Create Strapi droplet button here. So we can create one on DigitalOcean in one click, see it get spun up, and we have a brand new app online. But what I'm going to do this here is, I have a question here in chat. Why are we doing the Strapi side again? I just want to, if anybody didn't watch the webinar last time, we're going to build an API real quick. Don't worry, this will only take about 5 minutes of our time, and then we'll go to the front end side. So here I have my terminal open. Actually, let's go to Strapi, go to resources, documentation, real quick. Here's the quick start guide. I'm going to grab this right here, and we're going to go here and create a new Strapi project. So we'll let that run, and as that's running, we're going to just start stubbing out our React application. So I'm going to open up a split right here, and I'm going to go npx create React app, and I'm going to call this Strapi React. And I hope that's large enough for everyone can see, and I'll hit enter there. So from here, we started out with 0 projects. We are creating a backend in this top terminal with Strapi, and we're creating a front end with React in this right here. So question here, is this run on the droplet? We could do it directly on the droplet. Right now, I'm just going to do a local Strapi install, which we can then push up to DigitalOcean. But right here, since we're in development, I want to do everything locally since it'll be a little bit quicker. All right, so a question here, why am I using npx versus npm? npm will use whatever is locally installed. npx just says, okay, I'm going to go grab the latest version of Create React App before we use it. So npx is just a fun way to say, okay, go grab the latest version, so I don't have to do like the npm install global Create React App or whatever it is. Okay, so we have our Strapi project here already started. Let's create our API. So our backend first. Here's the Strapi dashboard at localhost 1337, and you can run this locally. And if you go to the Strapi docs to create your own API. So here we are. Chris is my username. I'm just going to type in a password here. Let's throw in an email, and here we go. And I know I'm speeding through this, but if you didn't watch it, again, it's on YouTube for the previous one. So what are we going to build today? I know it's boring, but we're going to build a blog type thing. So if we go to content types, we're going to need a post. So I'm going to go create new collection type. I'm going to call it a post. And then if we go continue. So what I'm doing here is basically building out our API and our dashboard in like 5 minutes. So I'm going to go title is the first field that we want in this post type. And we're going to say rich text is content, and that'll be it. So our post type has title and content. I'm going to hit save. So we create a post type, we go create the content is the second step. So I'll go my first post. Oh, here we go. I clicked the wrong button. My first post right there. This is some cool, I can't spell today. Oh, wow, really bad. Cool content. I'll hit save. We'll create a new one. My second post. Some more cool content. Okay, so step 1, install Strapi. Step 2, create content with our custom post type. And step 3, make sure that it is publicly available. So we go public. I want to be able to find and find one. So that means anybody can view these things. These are public things, the post types. So now we can go localhost 1337/posts. And now this is going to be the API that we're going to use in our React project. Okay, so we have all this. We've created our API in about 5 minutes. Really cool stuff. Now let's start using our React app to consume it. So if we go over to this right here, what did I name it? Strapi React. I'm going to open up this thing in VS Code. Cool. So we have VS Code here. Let me hide some things so we have a little bit of a cleaner UI to work with. I'll hide the activity bar. I'll hide the status bar, and I'll zoom in a bit for you all. Okay, so here is the base Create React app, the React app that Create React app gives us. I'm going to open up my terminal and I'm going to start this right here so we can start developing our React app. And this is going to be the base React app that we get. So nothing fancy here. I'm going to close all these tabs now. And now we are left with 2 tabs, one for our dashboard and one for our React application. So one of the questions here is, can Strapi accept a post request from the front end? So can we do a creation on the front end? And yes, the answer is yes, we are going to do that in this webinar. Question here also, where are the posts here stored? Right now, since we are working locally, Strapi went ahead and created a SQLite database locally, which by default it uses SQLite. You can switch that out for Mongo, Postgres, MySQL, whatever you want. And then when you go to production on DigitalOcean, you can use MySQL, Postgres, whatever you need there. But right now, SQLite, since we're local and it's not too big of a deal. So the first step here is that I want to show how to use the API. And the cool thing is that I know this webinar is using React to use an API, but the cool thing about the Jamstack world, if you're getting into the Jamstack sort of mentality of how websites are built these days, is we are separating the back end from the front end and then connecting the two with an API. And that's the A in Jamstack. So the cool thing about this is if we have a REST API, we can use any front end that we want. And to prove it, if I go to Insomnia, which is a tool to kind of inspect APIs, I'm gonna close, let's delete all these. I love that UI right there, double click to delete. So we'll click new request, my request, I'll just create it. If we go to HTTP localhost 1337, this is our API. What is this? Oh, I have to go to /posts. And now we get our API. So we can use it as an API. We can use React on the front end. We can use Vue, Hugo, Laravel, whatever you need, you can grab data from the API. So the question was Jamstack. What is Jamstack? Jam, J-A-M, is JavaScript, APIs, and markup. So I'm leaning pretty heavily to the JavaScript world right now. And this is kind of a mentality of basically saying, have an API for your content and the front end use markup to kind of statically generate a site. So if you're talking about static site generation, you're talking about in Go, you can use Hugo. In React, you can use Gatsby. In Vue, you can use VuePress. In there's Jekyll that can also do the job. Does Strapi allow switching databases? Yes, you can switch databases to whatever you need. And then the question that always comes up that I probably should answer all the time is font. What am I using for my VS Code? Font is Cascadia Code, which is a free font. Theme is Monokai.pro. And yeah, I think those two are good. My terminal is using ZSH. Okay, so I can close the terminal. I don't need that anymore. Let's open up app.js, which is where the core of our app lives, our React app. And let me split left and right. So here we are. If I delete all of this stuff right here, React will go ahead and just restart this so nothing is there. And I can just type in hello, right? Cool. So the first step here is to grab data from our API. And that's what our whole webinar is about, right? Is grabbing data from an API. Let's see, question, sorry, I'm just running through questions as we go along. Question is Batcave. If you see here, Batcave is just the folder name that I have for where I keep all my projects. I don't like just naming it like my documents, so I just threw in the word Batcave. So let's open that up. Let's open this up. Okay, so the first step here is to grab data from the API, and we can do this not even React specific. We'll use a fetch. So here I'm going to say fetch HTTP localhost 1337/posts. And since this is a JavaScript fetch, we have to unwrap the response.then response response.json. So we're unwrapping it, grabbing the data from it. .then we can console.log it. So let's see what happens here. Let's go open console log for our browser. And here we have an array of 2 items. Let me zoom in. So it was that easy to get data from our API. So here we are 14 minutes into the webinar. We have created an API locally and created some content and been able to grab that content using a front-end framework. And that only took us about 15 minutes. So where are the questions posted? If you look at the GoToWebinar, there's like a little questions box that you can throw questions into. Question here, why am I using Create React App instead of a manual Webpack config? Create React App is a little bit easier than that, and it only is 1 line in the command line, so that's good. Let's see, how does that work with await and async? We could do, like, let's say we did function get posts. We could change this to moving all of this in here, right? So we would have a function get posts. If you wanted, you could do an async right here. We could call it const response is equal to await fetch. And we could say, then we would have to unwrap this. So const data is equal to await res.json. And then we could console.log the data. And then something you always want to make sure you do if you're using a, if you did the fetch and you did the .then, you should use a .catch to make sure you catch any errors. And then if you're using the await way, you can do the try catch way of doing that. So both ways are valid. If we do that right there, let's do a console.log data right here. And that's not going to work because we never called it. So if I call it right here, cool. So now we get the same data using async and await in JavaScript. All right, so question here is, what is the difference if between fetch right here and Axios? Axios is a third-party library for making API calls, making HTTP requests, and fetch is built into JavaScript. So the reason I went with fetch is it's just built in. It's a little bit, I don't have to install a third-party package. If you were to go for a more production level app, then Axios is definitely a great choice. So the next step is let's start displaying this data here for our posts. If we want something to run when this application is mounted in React, we can't just use, well, we can, but it's not the most efficient way to do it. We could just do get posts right here. If we're doing this in React, we probably want to use effect. And use effect is a way to say, hey, you should run when this component gets added to our browser. So there we go, get posts. And it runs the same. It runs when we expect it to. The next step here, if we want to display something in React, is we need to have it in React state. So what I'm going to do is import useState. And I'm going to create a state variable called posts. And then I'm going to create a pull out the method to update posts there. And then we're going to go useState is an empty array to start. So we'll do use effect. So when this React component gets mounted, it uses effect. It will call get posts. Get posts will go hit our API. And then down here, instead of console.logging the data, I'm going to set posts for data. So now we're able to get the posts, but now we need to display the posts. So down here, if we want to loop in React, we are going to go here. And let me write that down. So here we're going to go post.map, post index. And this is just how you loop in React if you're not familiar with it. The cool thing about it is that mapping is just a JavaScript method on an array, which this post is an array. That's why I like saying that if you learn JSX, you will become a better JavaScript developer, because JSX, which is React's templating library, so much of it is just pure JavaScript. So here we're going to go div, and we're going to go h2 post.title. And if you're looping in React, you always have to add a key to the parent element right there. And that's how we're going to loop in React. So check it out. We have my first post and my second post, and we're able to display that data in React using React state. So useState is used to store variables that are going to be rendered onto our application. That's why posts is right there. And effect is used to run things at certain times. So basically, this is an effect that we are going to run when our app starts. So both of these work really well together to build out our React applications. All right, so next step, let's see if this actually works really well. Let's go to our dashboard here. Let's go to /admin in our Strapi dashboard. I have to log in again. Let's hit remember me this time. Okay. Let's zoom out a little bit. Let's go to posts. We have my first post. Let's edit this to, whoa, this got edited. Save that. And we'll create a new post, third post. Stuff right here. I'm getting lazy. And then if we just refresh this, it should update. Cool. So now we've been able to build our API and get some data with React. So let's see. Next step here, and I'm going to batch questions like every, I don't know, 10 minutes or so we can kind of keep the flow going. So one thing that I want to do here is talk about if we can create something from the front end, which isn't really the best use case in this webinar, because right now we have a CMS to build out posts and stuff like that. So why would we actually create stuff from the front end? Strapi is really cool because it's not just about creating a blog. Let's say we wanted to create something like, let's say we created a custom content type called likes, and then a like could be applied to a post. Then you would definitely want to create likes from the front end. So like, let's say I click this, it would create a like that went to the back end. And if you're interested in that, we can definitely build out like something really robust in the next webinar. Right now, I just wanted to talk about just grabbing data from an API in React, because there's two more options beyond just using fetch. So let's see, if we want to create from the front end, you go to our roles and permissions again. And right now, our roles and permissions are not public to create. You have to authenticate to create a post, and Strapi comes out of the box with authentication, but there's a lot to it that I don't want to deal with right now. So I'm just going to go and say, hey, create. Let's make that a public access point. So you can do a post request to /posts, and now we're able to create. save that. Let's go to post, and just to prove that it works, let's go back to Insomnia. Where are you? And let's change this from a GET request to a POST request. Let's throw in some body information. Say title is I was created from the API. So if we hit send on this, it should create. You need to provide your data in the JSON data field. Okay, this is a formatting problem. Let's see. Doesn't want this. Data, oh wait, this is JSON, so it's data. No, it's title. And I was created from an API. Okay, so we just had to send it in as JSON data instead of form data. But we're creating from here, from our post request to the same URL. And if we go to our dashboard, refresh, it should show there. All right, there we go, number 4. And if we go to our React app, it should show again. There we go. So we're able to get this whole flow of a CMS and show it in the front end all through the API that was created. Okay, so Strapi handles a lot of stuff that we're not touching on in this webinar. There's a lot we can do in a future webinar of like, let's build an actual real app that has way more features. But here, Strapi can do authentication, and it can do role management and authorization. And that comes out of the box. If you go here, there's roles and permissions. You can create new roles and say like, I don't know, author, administrator, that kind of stuff. And each one can have different access to different resources and content types. Let's see. Strapi does handle image upload and all that good stuff. Anything that you would expect for a CMS. Okay, so it looks like there's a lot of questions on building out something further in Strapi, and I think we can do that in a future web. I think that'll be really fun, actually. Maybe something more than a blog or a to-do app. So let's see, I have this here. Let's create a post from here. What time do we have left? Okay, so here, let's create a post. I'm going to create a function, which let's create a new React component. And in React, a component is really just a JavaScript function, which is really cool. Function create post form. And then we're going to return form. And let's see, form input type is text. Name is title. And since we need to handle state, I'm going to write this a little fast, but we're going to say const value. Actually, let's change this to const title. Set title is equal to use state. What is that? State. Sometimes the autocorrect is just bananas. Okay, so now we need to set this title to this input field. So we'll go value is equal to title. And then we need to handle when somebody types into this box. So we're going to say on change E. We're going to set title e.target.value. And if that was a little confusing, that's just how React handles forms. I know it should be simpler, but you have to be explicit in React. So we're going to handle the change, and we're going to bind the value to this input. So it's kind of a two-way process. Now we need to handle on submit, and we're going to say handle submit. So right here, I'm going to say function handle submit. And the cool thing here is that we're going to prevent default so that our browser doesn't refresh the page when we submit this form. And we're going to say fetch right here, HTTP localhost 1337/posts right here. And we're going to say method is post, and data, or is that body? I think it's body. JSON.stringify. And if you're wondering how I'm typing all this, this is just from knowing how to use fetch from using it so long. JSON.stringify, and we're going to pass in title right there. So this is everything to do the post request that we saw in Insomnia right here. Right here, basically post to this and send in the data as a JSON string right here. And here, we've created this form. Let's go create this form and use it now. So we'll go here. Now we have this ugly looking form up here. So let's say title from my form, and then we'll hit submit, which that's not a very good error to see. Let's go down. So we have title, set title. Input is the value is title, on change is set title to that. Okay. So the problem here is handling this, which I don't know why that would be a problem. Let's create a blank string to start, and then let's see if that doesn't fix it. Okay, that does fix it. So basically what I'm saying here is I want title to start as a blank string and then update it accordingly. But before, since I did nothing, it actually started as undefined, which if you try to change undefined to a string, threw an error. So here we are with a blank string title. Oh, look, that actually posted the last one from a second form. Enter, that'll do a post. If we look at our network tab, it did the post request. If we go look at our dashboard, it shows in our dashboard. So we're able to now create from our React app, although it's not production ready at all, but proof of concept is there, right? We can create a Strapi API, use any front end to do a post request, and now we're creating content from the front end. So you could do this with any sort of app that you want. Like if you wanted, one that I did like a month ago was basically corgis, and you could like corgis, and so you got a relationship type in there. You got corgi dogs in there. A lot of fun. Okay, so a couple questions here. How is the form bound to the enter button? Forms, HTML forms are automatically bound. If you're inside of one of the inputs inside of a form and you press enter, that actually submits the form. But a better, more accessible way would be to actually create a button and submit like that. So that would be a more accessible way so you could actually see the button. And sometimes you have to do type is submit, but if a button is inside of a form, its type is by default submit. So that's that. Let's see. Okay, so we got a thing over here that says we're doing too much Strapi. All right, so let's go over to the React side more. And I actually am going to speed through this one a little bit. So here we are going to, let's recap. We've done the REST API, and we've been able to grab data using fetch up here, and we've been able to post data using fetch right here. If we did authentication, you would actually do headers authorization as the bearer, and then your token like that. And that's something we can handle in a future webinar, but Strapi has authentication out of the box, so we can do that. Okay, so that we have REST APIs handled. Let's go look at how we can add a GraphQL API and see if we can't grab data using a GraphQL API. And it is a little bit more writing, but if you are interested in GraphQL, it's a really good thing to look at. So yeah, fetch is async for the question there. And let's go to Strapi, the dashboard. We'll go to Marketplace. GraphQL is one of the options in the Marketplace plugins. Just hit download, and that should install it. And what's cool is you can actually see it happening live. If you go into your terminal, it says installing GraphQL right there. And I know we said we're doing too much Strapi, but you can't really do the front end unless you have the data in the back end. So sorry about this. So installing GraphQL, it's probably just updating our package.json for our JavaScript dependencies. But while that's there, let's go talk about how we're going to use GraphQL. So if we look, we already have GraphQL installed here. And the cool thing about GraphQL is you kind of write your queries a little differently. So if we wanted to query this GraphQL API instead of a REST API, you would always hit one endpoint, which is this GraphQL endpoint. And from this endpoint, we can actually say, okay, look, we want to do a query where we go grab posts, And in the post, we want title. So the cool thing about GraphQL is that you can specifically say what properties you want. So you can say, okay, I want the title and I want the content, and see how that changes right there. You have the posts like that, or you can say, okay, look, I don't want the title like that. So GraphQL really cool in that it's really easy to selectively choose the things that we want. But here, let's grab title and content. And now let's talk about how we can bring GraphQL into React. So here we are, Apollo GraphQL is kind of the front end library that we're going to use for grabbing data from an API, a GraphQL API in React. So there's a few ways we can do grabbing data from a GraphQL API. You could do it like directly without React, but since we're doing it in React, Apollo client is one of the easiest ways to do it. And I'll switch to version 3.0 since that's kind of imminent and easier to use. Question here, is there an alternative to GraphQL? Yes, that would be, I mean, REST APIs are still very strong. If you want to use that, no problems there. Let's see. So here we have our quick start. I'm just going to add all the libraries. Where is the get started? I don't want to walk through docs with you all, but here, let's actually create our React app so that it can pull data from a GraphQL API. So here, there's actually a few steps to this. And if you're interested in this, we can definitely do more. So we'll do yarn add Apollo client and GraphQL. Yes, it is possible to use GraphQL without Apollo client. Apollo just makes it a little bit easier, especially for a timed webinar like this. So, and I'll show you what I'm doing because you probably think I'm like cheating at all this stuff, but it really is a copy and paste job. I wish it was easier, but in the spirit of full transparency, I'm just going to copy all the stuff we're doing. So imports all this stuff from Apollo client. So we go up here, we import. And I know it should be a little bit easier than all this writing, but it is what it is. So we do an import, we create a client, and then we connect to our GraphQL API. So here we connect using this client creation thing. So I'll create const client equals new Apollo client. It caches for us by default, which is cool. And then this is not our URL. Our URL is our new local API, which is this. All right, so that's enough to kind of get us started with GraphQL's Apollo client. Sorry, Apollo client. All right, so this is kind of how you can use GraphQL by itself, is you just run the query using this GQL thing. But since we're doing React, we're going to do the React way of doing things. Let's see. So the things we have to do is, one, we have to wrap everything with an Apollo provider. And I'll do a recap on this. I know we're doing a lot of typing. So the next step is to wrap everything with Apollo provider. So I'm going to go down here, wrap everything with this Apollo provider, and wrap that right there. And since we're moving to this GraphQL stuff, like let's just delete all this stuff. Let's delete all this. And let's delete this create post form. And let's move this up because I like it when it's on a single line. It's a little bit easier. Okay, so this is where we're left with our app that is getting ready for GraphQL stuff. So the next thing to do is to go grab data. Let's see. So to do this, we're going to grab two things from the Apollo client. And it's important to note here that this setup stuff right here, you only have to do the one time, right? Like you don't have to write this all the time. So that's just like part of using Apollo client. But let's grab use query and GQL, and let's go down here. If we're trying to be a little bit smarter about how we maneuver around our components, let's create a brand new one called posts area, I guess. Now here, we're going to create a query, which is going to be similar to the one we just did. We're going to call this get posts. And we don't even need to name it. But here we're going to say posts. I want the title and I want the content. So we're writing out our GraphQL query exactly how we did inside of the GraphQL playground that we had earlier. And all right, so a lot of typing for finally this fun part where we are going to use the use query hook. And this is going to be the get posts right there. So now we're going to say if loading, we're going to say return loading. Let's do the same for error. And now if all of those things pass and we actually have data, we're going to return here, we're going to say, actually, let's just console log the data and see what happens. And then up here, we need to actually use this. So we're going to go here and say post area. Posts area, what do I call it? Posts area. Oh, all right. So a lot of writing. I know that was a little quick. I'm sorry about that. But we are coming up on time. So if you want, we can definitely push this into another webinar and do more GraphQL. So here, let's refresh. Actually, I need to restart our server. All right, let's check that this works and we'll do a recap real quick. All right, so we have our hello there. Let's go to our console and we have data here. Posts is an array of 6. And this is running twice just because React in development mode kind of does like a bunch of checks and maybe sometimes runs things twice. But here we have our data. And instead of pulling from a REST API, we're now pulling from a GraphQL API. And it took a little bit more setup, but the cool thing is GraphQL gives us a lot of strength when we query kind of larger sets of data, as far as like filtering and only grabbing the things that we need. GraphQL is really great at doing all that stuff. So recap real quick, let's go look at the code. All of this stuff right here, Apollo client, HTTP link, in-memory cache, Apollo provider are for just setting up Apollo, right? And we have the Apollo provider, so we're saying, okay, everything underneath right here is able to use Apollo now. And now we have a brand new component down here where we created a query and we said, okay, let's go get posts and we'll display the posts here, which we haven't done yet. Let's go ahead and do that real quick. We'll go data.post.map, post index. Let's go div key is index. And we'll go h2 post.title. And that works the same way as our fetch from the REST API did. Okay, so recap again, let's talk about it. We've created an API. We are creating a REST API and a GraphQL API. We have been able to connect to it using fetch. We've been able to create content using fetches with the method of post. And now we're able to grab data from the GraphQL API using Apollo. So if we're talking about grabbing data in React, there's a couple different ways we can do it. As long as you have an API, React has a very strong way to do it. Yeah, if you do any stuff in the GraphQL playground, let's say the question here is if we swapped content and title, then you would get content first. So that's a question. Strapi is a good solution for large scale apps. It's basically just a dashboard on top of your database. And as far as scaling Strapi, you would have to make sure that your database could handle all the connections. It depends on how many people are in your dashboard as far as like the droplet that you put Strapi on. But we can definitely talk about like scaling a production level app in one of the next webinars. Yeah, so here we are coming up on about 45 minutes of webinar. Let me know what questions you have. We're about to answer, we're in the Q&A part of it, but hopefully that was helpful. Let me know what your feedback is in the questions. And yeah, just grabbing data in React is actually pretty good process. I think the hard part about it is just figuring out where to grab the data in your components and how to kind of structure grabbing data. But the cool thing is that Apollo kind of helps with this use query hook right here. So it gives you a loading state, an error state, and a data state to kind of handle all that stuff. Question, how many Strapi instances can run on a single droplet? If you wanted to install multiple, you could. It just depends on like, make sure that you are routing to it correctly, make sure that you have your database connections right. But as far as the simplest way to do it, DigitalOcean has a marketplace, Ocean Marketplace, Strapi. We have a one-click right here where you can just deploy it to a droplet, and then it'll give you an IP address, and then you can use that as your API. Are you able to define GraphQL routes in Strapi? Well, the thing about GraphQL is you have one route. So if you wanted to do a create, then this would change from a query to a mutation. And then you could send data through, like let's say you would send title is a string, and then you would define how your mutation works here. So then you would have one place where you point everyone to, which is /GraphQL, and then you would do a mutation if you wanted to change data, or you would do a query if you wanted to get data or anything like that. And you could do all your filtering through this parameter right here. All right, so any thoughts on fetch versus Axios? Axios is great because it works in Node as well. So if you're doing anything where you are kind of fetching data in the server side and the browser side, Axios works great. Fetch will not work in Node because it's a browser API. I think Axios is very good, especially for like production level apps. Fetch is really good for demos like this. I think Fetch is good, but I would personally probably reach for Axios if I went to do a more production level app. So question on here, line 48. So React wants to be, the question is why do we have a key here? React wants to be as efficient as possible when it has like a list of things so that it can say, okay, if I need to update this list, I only want to update like item number 3. The key will tell React, hey, that's the specific one that should update, or that's the specific one that you should delete. And that's how React kind of handles being really fast about UI updates. Is Strapi free? Strapi is free. It is an open source product, so you could install it anywhere for free. The only thing you'd have to pay for is wherever you host it. And on DigitalOcean, there are $5 droplets, so you can use that as your API and then scale it as needed once you start looking at like how much usage it gets. So a question about React, what is this? So a lot of the stuff about React is it tries to be as performant as possible and not like waste any browser resources. So the way it does this is it will only re-render our template whenever something in state changes. So if I just did const posts is equal to, well, let's just do a simpler variable. Username is equal to Chris on code. If I change that later, well, if I wanted to change it, it has to be a let. If I wanted to change that later, username is equal to now at Chris on code. React would say, well, this isn't in React state, so I'm not going to re-render our entire application. So state is React's way of saying, okay, I will, anything in state, I will watch and re-render for if it changes. And that's just the syntax that they have. Array destructuring right here is a JavaScript feature. It's not React specific. And useState is their function that they give us. Let's see, can we secure Strapi routes? Yes, we can. That's all done through the Strapi dashboard. And it sounds like authentication in Strapi is really important for a lot of people. So that's something we can handle in a future webinar. Is there any difference in queries using MongoDB or MySQL? There are no differences on the dashboard side. Strapi is really good because it handles all of the connections to whatever database you want to use. So it looks transparent to you because it just spits out the API. Let's see. Strapi grabbing external data. You can definitely do that. The cool thing about Strapi, and let's go here. Let's go back. I believe it was just called My Project. If I open this up in code, this is the entire file structure for Strapi. If we go to API, we go to post, this is kind of where we see our attributes right here. So there's title that we created, there's content that we created, and all of that comes from the dashboard. So anytime you make changes to the code right here, it will reflect in the dashboard. And to show that off, let's go like slug. So as soon as I save that, I should be able to go to the dashboard. Where'd I put that? Go to posts, content types, post, and now there's a slug right here. So anything you change in the code will show up in the dashboard. So the cool thing here is that you can go here and say, okay, I want stuff to run like on save. Then you can go get data from external source. So all of this is just node code right here, and you can do anything you want to your models right here. Can Strapi be used with Gatsby? Yes, it can. I was gonna touch on that in this webinar, but there isn't enough time. But if you go here, there is actually Gatsby source Strapi, and it's a Gatsby plugin that you can install, and you just configure it with these few lines right here, and you say, hey, my content types here, and GraphQL will go ahead, go grab that data from the Strapi API, and you can use that to build out your Gatsby blog, whatever you need. Does useState replace this.state? Yes, it does. Since we're doing we made our React app in the functional way, useState does replace this dot state. And this dot state is for the class way of doing things. If you did like class extends React dot component, then you would use this dot state. Can you and should you use a domain with Strapi? I would recommend doing so. Once you spin up a DigitalOcean server with the Strapi one-click, it'll give you an IP address. Then it's all about adding in your IP address, or sorry, your domain and your SSL certs to make sure that that Strapi API is secured. What is the best way to create classes, or sorry, components in React? I personally prefer using the functional way of doing things, but it is important to note that the class way is still valid. React hooks like this thing right here are more newly introduced, and I think it makes your code a lot cleaner. So I prefer that way personally, but both are valid. Moving forward, I'm going to use the functional way completely. Should your React domain where your React app is deployed be different than your Strapi domain? I would recommend it being so. There's a big push lately in web dev to kind of separate your backend from your front end so that your backend is in one location and then your front end is in another. And that's really important, especially if you're doing static site generation, because your URL, your front end site should never have access, like to give out API access to anybody. So we got about 5 more minutes. I'll go through some more questions. Using Gatsby with Strapi after I update some new posts. Yes, so anytime, especially this is just a Gatsby thing, since it's statically generated, every time that you update your content, you would need to update your Gatsby. You would need to regenerate your site with Gatsby. And that goes for any static site generator like Hugo or Jekyll or whatever. Can you connect Strapi to a database in a different location for scalability? I actually don't know the answer to that. I would love if it could though, because global availability is kind of important these days. but sorry, I wish I had that answer. For creating dynamic sites, is Gatsby better or React better? Gatsby is a static site generator, so it actually like pre-creates your pages, which is great, but something that most people kind of like gloss over is that Gatsby can also be a dynamic site. So it spits out HTML first, and then everything else on top of that can still be React, can still be dynamic. So I think that is a great way to go, is if you can deliver your site statically first, then your site will be faster upfront. And then the things that don't really matter can be attached on later with JavaScript and React. If you're looking for super dynamic, I highly recommend Next.js. I really, really like Next.js. And I would say this is kind of a better fit if you're looking for really dynamic apps that aren't just a blog plus JavaScript. Let's see, question about React. How do you modify the head content? In React, to modify anything in the HTML head tag, you would use React Helmet is a good package for it. So if you go down here, basically you import this helmet component, and then anything inside of this helmet component will get spit out into the head of your document. Let's see, I'm going for the VS Code. How is my code so clean? I'm actually using Prettier to auto format my code. So if I just did like a bunch of stuff like this, I know I wasn't a fan at first, but as soon as you hit save, it like formats it for you. So I'm using Prettier to do that. I hated it at first, but I'm a big fan now. And my theme is Monokai.pro. Dynamic Gatsby site future webinar, definitely. I definitely want to do that. And I definitely want to do it with like Next.js as well. Does Strapi support social authentication out of the box? I don't think so. I think you'd have to bring in a third party like Auth0 for something like that. Okay, so here we are at 10:59. That was a lot of fun. Thanks everyone for checking it out. I know some parts of it got a little bit quick, but we can definitely dive into any part that you want as we go along to the next webinars. But definitely this video will be uploaded on the DigitalOcean.com, the YouTube DigitalOcean. If you want to reach me and have any suggestions, twitter.com/ChrisOnCode. So yeah, drop me some DMs here or message me there, and we'll definitely figure out the next webinars, especially if you liked certain parts of this, more Strapi, more React, Gatsby, whatever you want. Thanks everybody for stopping by. These are always a lot of fun, and thank you so much for all the questions. We are gonna try to put any questions we didn't answer into a document and email that out to you, and we will email you the link to this webinar as well. So yeah, thanks for joining, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.